Hello and welcome to Power Prism Training for Voices for Healthy Kids. My name is April Wallace. I'm the Senior Manager for Equity Strategy and Partnerships.
Hi, folks. I'm Erica Fung, National Senior Director of Advocacy here at Voices for Healthy Kids. We're glad that you can join us today. We're going to dive into campaign planning, learning a bit about the ins and outs of what makes your community or state efforts tick. Today's objectives. At Voices for Healthy Kids, we use the Power Prism, an advocacy framework created by My Power People LLC. The Power Prism framework is a step-by-step plan that'll help you recognize and also act on opportunities to build momentum in your campaign for change. Today, we're going to focus on campaign planning, which is guided by all of the power tools in the Power Prism framework. In future sessions, we'll present on the other tools in the Power Prism individually and how each strategy builds power for your campaign. Here's some key takeaways for today: an understanding of the campaign planning process using Power Prism, knowledge of the steps, as well as ways to get support in the campaign planning process, and also the key recognition that campaign plans do change. Campaign management. When a campaign is done well, it's a lot like being a symphony conductor. Everything sounds great. Conductors have a wealth of instruments and talented players at their disposal, which is not unlike coalition talent. A campaign manager can draw on the talents and passion of grassroots advocates, skilled lobbyists, media talent, community organizers, the whole group. But the truth is, none of these people has enough talent and skill to carry the entire day just playing on their own. Just like a symphony, each campaign requires different kinds of talent, different types of instruments, time to both push and pause, heighten the volume, invisible players behind the scenes, different folks at different times that really make it all work together. The sets of skills needed in policy change campaigns are often held by different individuals and oftentimes different organizations. A good campaign manager is someone who understands that her role is to find a way to have all of these players play to the best of their ability in ways that are harmonious, coordinated, and transparent. When each individual does their part, the players around them understand what they're doing, the work that's expected of them, and each person feeds off of each other and contributes to the whole. The campaign plan, like a symphony, also reflects the best of talent that's available. And taking a look at it, you can discern how to fill in the gaps to bring in other talent that you need. It's an effective tool for thinking about campaign planning because any good campaign needs to have proficient folks in each of the 6 Power Prism areas. The campaign manager doesn't have to be an expert in each area, but has to understand how each connects to the others. When we use Power Prism campaign planning model, we see the interdependency of each of these tools and the players that are a part of this work. The beauty of campaign planning is the interdependency, because with it comes that respect, leadership development, and power. The campaign manager is essential to pulling all of this together. So the best campaign planning in the world really can't work unless you have that effective campaign manager. Campaign management is a critical job. It requires some very specific character traits and not just skills. Someone who's excelled in a specific area of campaign advocacy, like lobbying or grassroots organizing, could make a good campaign manager, but not always. Not always. A good campaign manager has a specific type of personality, skill set, and way of looking at the world. Generally, great campaign managers are folks who are able to deal with a reasonable level of uncertainty. They're creative. They're problem solvers that tend to not take no for an answer. They're fast workers that thrive in chaos. Steady, but not intimidated by conflict. They're also people who are willing to ask for help, and they're comfortable knowing that they don't have all the answers themselves. They also are believers in the idea that getting something done well is sometimes better than getting it done perfectly. Why? Because it gets done. Hiring the right campaign manager is critical to any campaign. It may not be the person who wrote the grant or your CEO or executive director. The hire should be written into the campaign plan and be the person that's a doer and can make things happen. When hiring a campaign manager, it's critical for organizations to ask themselves, do we have someone on our team who has the skills to do this? Or do we need to hire someone? Can we task someone on our team with campaign management and remove some of their other responsibilities? These are all crucial questions to ask yourself. And it's important to realize that campaign management is not like adding a project. As nonprofits, we often fall into this trap. We start thinking, we'll just keep adding additional projects to this person's plate. It'll be manageable. But we know it's not always manageable. Campaigns are full-time, all-out endeavors that require that one to two go-to people that campaign partners know they can look to for leadership and direction at a minute's notice. So anyone taking on the role internally needs to have some responsibilities taken off of their plate so they can manage that campaign. One tool we have in the model is a campaign manager job description tool. You don't have to use this, but it could be a useful starting point when you're looking to hire or identify a team member with the needed skills. If you already have someone tapped to be your campaign manager, it can also assess their skill set so you can determine who else you might need to bring into the table to support that campaign manager. And in the case that you're hiring, you should always include community members from the community that's most impacted by the conditions that you're seeking to change to help with the hiring process. The campaign manager needs to know they are required to have good, standing, respectful relationship with the community on day one. The first step of campaign planning, and something you really have to do all along in the campaign, is to answer 3 key questions. Everything you do in your campaign planning and in your work should be informed and guided by your answers here. It's tempting to just want to jump in with methods and strategies, but winning policy change campaigns are really guided by these 3 questions. Answering the questions is an essential part of your campaign planning. We can't plan effectively for our day-to-day work without answers to guide us. You probably have spent some time thinking about these types of questions as part of a grant application or your community campaign, but we think it's important to revisit it back in the beginning of your campaign planning. The questions are, what do you want? What is the policy change you're seeking to address your issue? Why? Why do you want it? What data makes the case for that policy change? And who has the power to give it to you? This is where you've got to get specific, folks. Which specific decision makers in the state or your local community have the power to make that change happen? The answers to these questions can also change throughout your campaign. It's helpful to get into the habit of revisiting these questions regularly. That's okay, it's part of the process. It's also important to keep planning. And once you have these answers, it's time to start building your campaign plan and looking at strategies for each of the power tools and decision makers. As we try to have our work more and more centered in the communities and centered in equity and racial justice, the people you have at the table answering the 3 questions are really important. We encourage grantees and community organizations, anyone really taking on campaign planning work, to think about building in multiple opportunities for leadership for members of the community who are most impacted by the conditions you're seeking to change. They need to lead these conversations. They need to be part of these conversations and driving what they want. Here's why. You may be part of an organization that has a well-developed agenda. You've got science, you've got data, and you just want to roll it out to communities that you're trying to work with to improve quality of life. But without that community input, you could be missing essential campaign information. Communities and advocates, heck, they might have already tried something like this and it didn't work for a specific reason. Or maybe there's unintended consequences you didn't really think about. Or there's something else that's a much more pressing community need that's more appropriate at this juncture. For example, You might be planning on a sugar sweetened beverage taxation policy, but when you actually sit and listen to community members, they might tell you that their water supply isn't safe. If there's unsafe water coming into schools and water coming into homes is unreliable, maybe it's unclean, it doesn't smell great, sports drinks or sodas, heck, they might feel cheaper and safer. Community members might feel like they're being told what not to do instead of working on a healthy alternative. These conversations with the community, they're not simple, and they may require a change in direction and flexibility. So for this sugar sweetened beverage tax example, you might need to refocus work on healthy hydration policy, actually looking at access to water first and how you make water healthy and safe and no cost. So when these sort of issues bubble up from the community, there's an opportunity to be responsive and to try to develop policy approaches that meet the community where they are. If our goal is to help children and families be healthier in communities that have paid a steep price due to the impact of structural racism, we need to ask the communities these questions. What do they need or want related to this issue? What worked in the past? What didn't? Where do they see barriers to our approach or blind spots? So having these conversations early as part of a campaign plan is essential toward working toward equity, as well as working with community members and community intermediaries so that we are both leading side by side. So it's a pretty important thing to keep in mind as you're looking at these three key questions. And this next slide shows you just what we were talking about. Wanting to consider a sugary beverage tax policy, but the community might not have that access to water. It's really important to have these conversations early on so that we know that we're on the same page as an issue, or maybe even changing direction. Once we've answered the three key questions and have a sense of the decision-making body who has the power to give us what we want, we've got to identify the members and committees that have the most influence over the outcome of the campaign. Specifically, the 2 to 3 decision makers in leadership that are the gatekeepers of potential roadblocks to success. And this is where we start thinking about the campaign plan and the work we do with all of the Power Prism tools to build pressure and influence on key decision makers. Again, the campaign manager becomes the symphony conductor. Understanding who has the power to give us what we want allows us to plan. It also requires a series of research activities early on. And many of the research activities can be done by volunteers. Once you've answered the three questions, you're ready to move into campaign planning. I think, many folks might want to remember what it was like if maybe you had a child or a friend had a child that thought of bringing a child home for the first time. There's some preparations that have to be made. Maybe some advice was sought by experts or friends, thinking of supplies, clothing, toys you picked out, hazards you removed, getting the right seat for your car. There could be anticipation, excitement, fear, gratitude, all of the above. You're ready for the first phase of your child's life, but not the child's entire life. Realistically, most of us didn't have a plan for the first 6 months of a new life. But if we did, it often derailed before we knew it. So you just have to keep making those plans for each step of parenting. And sometimes folks have to wing it. Being a campaign manager is almost like bringing home a new baby at times. You have this all thought out, you gather so much information, but then the ball starts rolling in unexpected ways. You have to turn on a dime and make a new plan, change some amendments. Campaign planning is a lot easier in theory than practice. You have to prepare on making plans until the campaign is over, and then making plans for implementation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. People are under the impression that if you put a good plan together in the beginning and stick to it, that's the only time you need to do it. But the truth is, campaign planning is something that happens really every day. Campaign planning happens every day in real time because lives change. People are elected. People run for office, they're not elected. There could be a recall, you never know. There could be a pandemic, there could be natural disasters. So many different things happen that change the timeline and structure of the legislative session or your campaign. The political environment, coalition culture also impacts our campaign plans. So we must remember to be nimble and open to change. The campaign plan that maybe you've created and applying for a Voices grant or even other projects, when you're getting together with your coalition to put that plan together, it's intended to be written in pencil with a huge eraser, and it needs to be ready to adapt and change. That's bound to happen. Influencing decision makers is really about making it easier for them to give you what you want. The Power Prism is built on the 6 power tools of advocacy that help to apply pressure on decision makers to reach your policy goals. We use these same tools to help us plan our campaign to influence decision makers. The model's useful because it's designed to accommodate change. We can always use these power tools to think about a new event or circumstance to help us replan our work. The 6 tools are research and data collection, coalition building and maintenance, fundraising and development, grassroots and key contacts, media advocacy, and decision maker advocacy. Here are the larger picture campaign questions that you'll want to answer overall and keep re-answering over the course of your campaign. Within each Power Prism power tool, there are more specific questions to answer your guide to planning process. In every campaign tactic you generate, specifically think about that question 3. How will this tactic influence the key decision maker? If you can't answer this, you need to get more specific or working on it. On our website, you'll find more resources that we have available. All of these questions and our knowledge of the Power Prism help to create that structure for the campaign plan. So here's just a snippet of a sample campaign plan based on the Power Prism. And again, we have sample and model campaign plans that can be a starting point for you and your campaign that can be helpful. Thank you so much for your time in joining us for the campaign planning portion of this event. I'm going to hand it over to April, who's going to share about fundraising and development.
Today I'll be covering fundraising and development within the Power Prism. Advocacy work requires resources. For each advocacy campaign, you will need to create a projected budget for your campaign work, including infrastructure, staffing, collateral materials, research, lobbyists, and media. Then you'll need to determine what each member organization can contribute to the campaign budget. While some coalition members may not be able to contribute cash, they may have in-kind resources such as staff time, meeting space, and materials that can fill a budgetary need. These are valuable contributions and should not be overlooked. Next slide. There are 3 key questions you want to ask as you prepare for fundraising. Number 1, before approaching prospects, do you have 2 budgets? One that's bare bones and one that's a fantasy. The bare bones should meet all of your must-haves. And the fantasy budget would be, what would you do to win your campaign if resources were not an issue? Number 2, do you have a list of past, current, and prospective funders to approach and share a well-researched proposal? And number 3, how do you value and stimulate in-kind contributions? Once those are clear, design a plan for raising money to pay for those unmet needs. Next slide. Building power through your fundraising. You have opportunities to both engage your financial supporters in advocacy for your campaign and leverage the campaign to raise money for your organization. These are important opportunities that you should not leave on the table. You want to develop a hot prospect list for fundraising appeals. Advocacy organizations frequently limit their list of potential donor prospects to a small specific group. They tend to rely heavily on foundation support without equal time, energy, and effort invested in cultivating individuals corporations, and governments as potential funders. While not every potential source of donor dollars may be a good fit for every organization, it is important to carefully consider each and make an intentional decision about which to pursue and which not to pursue. And with each potential donor, there are 3 sectors which should be considered. Number 1, who has a mission that is an exact fit with ours? Number 2, who supports similar issues? And number 3, who wins if we win? Next slide. Engage financial supporters in advocacy. Financial supporters should absolutely be asked to be an advocate. Advocacy campaigns can be an effective selling point for donors who want to support policy work. You can also look to donors to ask them whether they have connections to any key decision makers. They might be willing to make calls or set up meetings on your behalf. Recent research has shown that the more ways an organization involves its donors and volunteers in its work, the more likely that those individuals will stay committed to the organization for the long term. Next slide. Leverage your campaign to raise money. Every advocate should be asked to be a donor. It is important to talk a little about the history of the coalition organization and/or campaign, its current priorities, and what it hopes to accomplish down the road. Give people an idea of where their money is going. Remember that people give money not because you have needs, but because you meet needs. Tell them how you are successful. Find local companies, foundations, individuals that actively support equity, racial justice, and invite them to support. Next slide. Power building for your campaign. In conclusion, think of your campaign events. How could you use fundraising and development to build power? How might your campaign event present a need or opportunity to enlist financial supporters as advocates? Might fundraising events be used to help raise money for the cause? Should funders be informed for any reason? Make sure that you ask every advocate to be a donor and ask every donor to be an advocate. Provide multiple ways and opportunities for individuals to do both, conduct good stewardship activities, and communicate with both donors and advocates frequently. This will be essential to the development and practicing and continually improving strategies to achieve your campaign goals. This concludes the fundraising development portion of the Power Prism training.